Stay informed. Power Talk with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday on Power 98.7.
So we turn to the story of electricity generation, Bantwana Bengosi. The car power ship deals with a Turkish company. Government had anticipated in and around 2021. So these car power ships are huge electricity generator that parks on the not far from the shores on the ocean, connect and give us electricity into the grid, contributing some few needed megawatts, such that South Africa is able to maybe make the transition as it fixes its power stations that are based on the land. The case was finally concluded yesterday, but I'm joined by Stephanie Fick, the Executive Director of OUTA, to speak to us about this matter. Stephanie, welcome to Power Talk. Thanks very much for creating time.
Only a pleasure.
Only a pleasure. Just a quick background for the benefit of our listeners. I don't know if I made justice, but I'm sure you can be able to give it in a much more detailed way.
Well, let me try. You did a pretty good job, but let me try. So we heard about these power ships quite a while ago when they were sold to us, if I can use that word, as an emergency power. In other words, we were experiencing load shedding, and they said that these ships in our harbors will help us with load shedding. What they didn't tell us is that it would have cost us an enormous amount of money, and they got distribution licenses for electricity even before they had environmental authorizations, financial close. They didn't even know whether Eskom will buy the electricity that they generate. So I think the main problem was really the amount of money South Africans would have paid for this deal. If this deal went through, it would have cost us 200 billion rand over 20 years. Mm-hmm. I've just read an article by Minister Ramaphosa. I mean, just 2 billion is enough to start building a better transmission network. In other words, it can provide or start to provide both the infrastructure that's needed to give communities that doesn't have power some power. But in any case, so NERSA gave them these licenses, but they didn't check all the boxes. So we were unhappy that NERSA didn't apply their mind and wasn't rational in their decision making. So we thought that we were going to approach the court in order to set these decisions aside. And a lot of what we have said in our application actually came true. We no longer have load shedding, and it's no longer an emergency situation, but we would have paid for those ships for the next 20 years. And it all will end up on your electricity bill. This is not as if they do it out of the goodness of their hearts. It would have cost us an enormous amount of money.
And what exactly was your problem with the deal? Is it only financial?
No, there was a lot of things. So our problem was mainly with NERSA. NERSA is our national energy regulator, responsible for a lot of decisions. NERSA is responsible for how much we pay for electricity, how much Eskom can call back from customers, etc., etc. So let's start with the financial. It's the fact that those 3 ships, although, if you speak to the environmental experts, will cause harm to the environment, so they'll only give maybe a stage or 2 of load shedding. Now, we don't have load shedding anymore, so we don't need that amount of power for now. We can rather spend that money in building better infrastructure and so that we can generate our own electricity. So it is not about person, taking into account all the factors that we believe they should before they just gave them generation licenses.
In a different light, South Africa's electricity is at the center of whether the economy grows or not. So if tomorrow it should grow by even just 1%, many experts anticipate that load shedding would be back. You need much more electricity than what we have currently, even at the best optimal generation of our power stations. In a way, we are told you actually have to build new power stations, and they were buying time. But be that as it may, should South Africa's economy grow by 1% tomorrow, on the one hand, you would go back to load shedding, we are told. Secondly, these new huge industrial projects, let's say we were really implementing the industrial strategy as outlined by the DTIC, the generation of within the automotive industry with electric vehicles, as well as digital technologies, they require a lot of electricity. If this economy is going to grow, create jobs, you need electricity. So a car power, and this is the sense as I understand it, gives you time. You are buying time as you expand the electricity, because if you do not have enough electricity for two, you are not going to grow the economy. Zero. It will affect businesses. What's your reaction to that argument?
So firstly, I agree with you. We need our economy to grow, and we need electricity to grow it further and not hamper it again so that we sit with load shedding. Car power ships was not your answer. So if you just take that 200 billion it would have cost us, and it's money that is not going, to South Africa. These are overseas companies, and we can have a chat whether they would have created jobs. They will probably create more jobs for foreigners than they would South Africans. I'm not an expert, but here's a few of my thoughts. So firstly, incentivize your electricity users that, for example, have solar, that can push electricity back into the grid. So incentivize them to reduce the load on the grid in order to, maybe spread the electricity and help Eskom, in that sense. Eskom should also go look at the expenditure. So we can talk about whether the salary bill is too high, whatever. Just ghost vendors. Eskom has got no clue how much money they lose with ghost vendors. Why not do a proper evaluation, and you may find that you have money in order to spend on your infrastructure. And then I think one still feels a reluctance in Eskom opening up the grid to other electricity providers. So Eskom is sitting with, if they are currently the only one, generating and providing us with electricity. And if they open up the market, I think what they are worried about is that they will then lose their grip, their monopoly on electricity. But if you open up the grid and make it, again, incentivize companies that will generate electricity, but also create jobs in South Africa, and make it more competitive. Electricity will become cheaper. We won't have to bail out Eskom every second year because they are struggling. And you have immediately an enormous amount of electricity available. But understand me, this is also not going to happen in a year or two's time, but it will definitely not take 20 years. And for us to pay that amount, we can rather invest that in infrastructure, invest that in alternative electricity. And I don't want to get into the argument whether, green energy versus coal and all of that. Where you are right is that we do have an electricity deficit. We need to work on that. But I think that there's a whole lot of other things that one can do before you turn to, for example, coal power ships. That is, floating ships that can give you some energy. You must just remember, these ships is also not plug and play. What you needed for those ships in any case is because they are in the harbors, you can imagine that you need a line that goes from here up. Our system currently is the other way around. You have a lot of mines in, Mpumalanga, so the electricity basically flows from the top down. In order to get that electricity from the bottom up, you would have to build infrastructure in any case. So it was never any sort of an emergency situation. And I think if we're talking about that, let's help Eskom in order to get their grid up to standard, it's also not the solution.
It seems to me then it boils down to independent power producers. If, for instance, Eskom, with its projections, spends about 200 billion, generates 200 billion, and spends 18% of 200 billion annually on independent power producers, which is about 45 billion rands every year. And independent power producers have proven, even in Germany, which was the most successful country to have gone to sort of this avenue of sort of green energy, solar, sun. It's not sustainable. It doesn't give you enough electricity for a super industrial project. If you're going to, because you need enough electricity if you're going to exhume South Africa out of the dungeon of deindustrialization. So you essentially just had two options: 3 car power plants positioned at the sea, guaranteed electricity far better than what the independent power producers are giving you at the same cost. There are not enough jobs in the green, on those solar panels, on those windmills that local big capital has invested in. So wasn't it in the interest of protecting independent power producers that are selling electricity at an exorbitant amount to Eskom, when they've got a cheaper option of a 20-year deal, which is less than what they were going to spend on independent power producers, to buy time and build more power stations until independent power producing for itself, generation and production, they reach it at the optimal level? Because industrial communities, Germany is a proper example. You need massive amounts of energy, and the IPPs with their green generation of electricity cannot match the industrial needs of electricity.
That's true, and that's why I don't want to get into really about the green energy. You need a base load in order to in South Africa, and your base load is currently being supported by coal, etc. Because you have that as a guarantee. Solar is dependent on the sun, and wind is. What I think, how I see the independent power producers is about putting more electricity out there. In other words, as a user, I can decide where I buy my electricity. And if that means that I want to buy some, solar, whatever, install my own solar, I have a variety. I can decide. You give me the decision. And what that gives then is, and it also has more competitive market. Power is expensive, but it becomes less expensive as the market opens. So again, you're giving me as a consumer the ability to choose, and then because of competition, that will drive the price down. What Eskom should be worried about is providing free basic electricity. In other words, in communities where people does not have the luxury to think about car power ships, they can't pay for that. They can't pay for green
But Stephanie,
energy.
as things stand, 45 billion rands annually in 20 years is almost $1 trillion.
Yes.
The car power ship is essentially a cheaper option with guaranteed electricity. Guaranteed. It's not even
20 years?
It's not even weather dependent. It's not even weather
20
dependent.
Yeah. In 20 years, I take these ships and you don't have it anymore. If you spend
you buy time. So you're going to spend 200 billion instead of spending $1 trillion, and then you could be using the rest of the money to drive towards autonomy in the generation of electricity as a country. I'm not sure what was wrong with this deal from Outa's perspective, except some critics would say the case was protecting local IPPs that have proven to basically be robbing the taxpayer. Eskom is spending a lot. It buys far much more. It's expensive, the type of electricity it's getting from independent power producers. Those car power ships, by comparison, were a cheaper option.
No, they wouldn't. So even the deal, let's forget about whether you prefer, a foreign country producing and whether you prefer local independent power producers. Forget about that. You know that in terms of that contract, the gas would have been bought in dollars. So firstly, you are exposed to the rand-dollar exchange rate. So even if you say that $2 billion spent is better than try and create more capacity in South Africa, we paid way more for that power ship than we should have. Why not bid in rand? So that we know what we're going to pay for gas prices. So what I'm telling you is that 200 billion is an estimate. It's probably going to cost us more than 200 billion because of the fluctuation. If the rand tanks,
but so would
it's going to cost you more.
So would be the IPPs. I mean, an estimation of R1 trillion over the same period. It's not the same. It's not the same. It's about. I mean, if the solar plants and the windmill plants and all of that, they're not labor intensive, so it's not a contestation of jobs. It's a contestation of who is the cheaper option whilst I redirect my capacity to build within Eskom electricity, get back to that industrial capability that existed before. It still doesn't make sense. But again, both you and I, even I'm not an expert, but just on the numbers, just on the numbers, it doesn't make sense. But thank you deeply. It seems that the court finally took your side. Is that the conclusion?
Yes, they agreed with us that the nurse's decision was irrational to give coal power generation licenses where we now know they didn't tick all the other boxes they needed in order to generate electricity.
I see. Stephanie Fick, Executive Director of OUT. Always a pleasure. Thanks deeply for creating time.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lovely having that conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you. Stephanie Flick, Bantwana Benkosi. I don't know what you think of this matter. If you've got any views, please do call in 0861987000.